Today, Canon just announced two really interesting things, and if you are into videography or into hybrid shooting, today's video will probably interest you. I'm Richard, welcome to ZP Productions, and today we'll talk about two things that Canon announced today. Firstly is the C70 firmware, and next is the R5C. So in front of me is the C70 and the R5C, and I put the Z9 here because I want to talk about it later. So the biggest thing for the C70 is the firmware upgrade that's going to come in March, and it will give ability to record RAW internally. So why is that a big deal? Now, the C70 biggest brother is the C300 Mark III, which shares the same DGO sensor within the C70, and the sensor has one of the biggest dynamic range. However, the C70 doesn't shoot RAW, the C300 III shoots RAW. In addition to the physical form factor, the RAW is probably the biggest difference between the C70 and the C300 Mark III. And when people who buy C70 never expected RAW to come because it only has SD card slots. So RAW requires a lot of space, a lot of speed, and SD cards isn't that fast. So I'm actually pleasantly surprised that Canon managed to create a more compressed version of RAW that fits into SD card. Probably I need to upgrade my SD card to the V90 versions, the best 300 megabytes per second versions, but that's fine because now the C70, it is literally a C300 just with a different form factor, and I am stoked. And it also has the RF mount. So the RF mount allows you to put on the speed boosters and whatnot. The C70 may actually be more useful than the C300 to me, because unless I'm rigging out like crazy, the C70 ability to put speed booster or if not mounting RF lens will be a better camera, especially once you have internal RAW. I do not know whether the C70 will rise up to such a great level. I'll wait for the firmware update and I will update you guys if you are still interested to see me talk about the C70, which I rarely talk about because this is really for me to get my videos done. Now, C70 is one thing. This is a cinema camera. It costs 5.5K. Now, the more interesting one is the R5C. In front of me is the R5. This is my wife's camera. I'm just using it as a prop today in my video. The R5C literally is the R5 with a fan behind. In fact, I can show you one screen here that is done by Canon. You literally can see it has the same look as what the C70 is. It is technically the van here, all the ports here, and yeah, you put the R5, yeah, literally. The C70 looks like the R5C. R5C is extends behind and the vent is same thing here, and then all the ports are here. The only thing is that Canon does weird stuff sometimes. It still has that micro or mini HDMI. I don't know why in the R5C, but it still is like that. In fact, Gordon Liang was reviewing the R5C. He also commented the same thing. I was totally agreeing with it. Now, one of the biggest difference in the R5C is the fan. And the fan allows you to shoot the R5, as long as you like. There's no overheating, there's no limit. And if you plug power into the R5C, you can do 8K 60p. Now that is a big deal because that is what is promised in Z9. It has yet to be upgraded firmware. There is still no 8K 60p here. And once the R5C comes out, it may come out faster than the Z9's firmware. It will be truly the first camera that does 8K 60p on a more consumerish price, a sub 10,000 price. Because if you want 8K 60p, you probably need to go into like RAID camera, which costs a whole lot more. So 8K 60p, you just need to plug external power, which you can supply with USB, I believe. So USB PD on it, and then you get the external power. But if you ask me, that is not the biggest improvement. The biggest improvement is the software part of things. Now, if you have used a cinema camera before, the biggest difference between a cinema camera and a video camera, or should I say a mirrorless that can shoot video, is the firmware. What does the firmware do? It allows you to shoot using shutter angle rather than shutter speed, so not 150 but rather 180 degrees, 360 degrees, whatever. So that is good because you can set different frame rates on your video and it automatically changes your shutter accordingly. And if you forget, that is a good way to deal with it. And next thing is that the cinema firmware has a lot of the monitoring functions such as waveforms, force colors, zebras. Yes, most of our cameras have zebras, but definitely no waveform, no force colors. And that firmware will allow you to use waveform and force colors, because what they're going to do with the R5C is that once you switch to video mode, as shown in Gordon Liang's video, because I saw his video just now, I was really impressed. His video showed that the R5C, when switched to video mode, will look like the C70's firmware. That is fantastic. Force color, shutter angle, vector scope, waveforms, these are everything that makes a video camera a video camera. It makes monitoring easy in the field. using the camera itself. No need to add additional monitor plugins and what's not, and you get all the necessary monitoring tools to get your job done. So I think the R5C with the firmware, the fan, no overheating limit, no time limit, 8K 60C, ability to have all the monitoring function, proper cinema firmware, it's building up to be a really exciting hybrid camera. But it's still not yet a cinema camera, because why do we use cinema cameras? It has the audio functions, it has big batteries, it has variable NDs, in addition to all the monitoring function and tons of buttons. Now, the R5C definitely will not have as many buttons as what you see on a cinema camera. This cinema camera literally has tons and tons of buttons, all the way front, back, behind. There's 12 programmable buttons and many unprogrammable buttons still. The R5C is supposed to have 13 programmable buttons, but I think it probably has slightly lesser because the amount of buttons you can stack at the side is slightly lesser. But most importantly, everything that the C70 have can be upgraded to be achievable on the R5C. First, you can buy this filter, this EF to RF adapter with the ND, plug into the R5C, and you have built-in NDs. So that's the first gain. Then, if you want the audio, the R5C comes with a digital interface, and Tascam has announced, you take a look at this photo here, the XLR interface. And once you plug it in, R5C will have professional audio interface for a video camera. So you get the professional audio interface. And lastly, for battery life, you can either fit it with PD power, or if not, buy a grip. Now, I'm not too sure whether the R5 grip can fit it. I'm assuming that it will probably. And with the grip, you will have the same battery life as you get in cinema cameras, such as this kind of BPA batteries, which is like 3 times bigger than the LPE6N. And with the grip, you probably can have an R5C with tons of battery life. So the R5C literally is a cinema camera now. As long as you plug in everything of this, all the accessories, it is literally a cinema camera. And the only downside to it is lower dynamic range, because the R5 sensor just don't output as much dynamic range as, say, the C70 sensor. Based on a lot of tests, you can go online and take a look at yourself, look at CineD. In fact, let me show you the shot here. It does have lower dynamic range than the C70. Even though without the RAW and stuff, the C70 still spanks the R5 in terms of dynamic range. I assume that the R5C with its dual base ISO and of course enhanced firmware will probably gain a little bit more dynamic range, and with the better noise reduction, it probably is slightly better. I don't think it will still be as good as the C70 because it doesn't even have C-Lock 2, it only has C-Lock 3 with RAW. C70 will have C-Lock 2, C-Lock 3 and of course RAW. That said, literally the R5C is a C70 with a lower dynamic range, but with a full frame look. So if you are looking for a full frame look, the R5C is a very good alternative to the C70 just by losing half a star of dynamic range or maybe 1 star of dynamic range. So all in all, I can say is that if you are a hybrid shooter, the R5C may actually be even a better choice than getting a cinema camera and what's not, because you still have the shutter to take photos. Now, there is only one downside to the R5C is that firstly, it uses a micro HDMI port, which suck. And secondly, the R5C doesn't have inbuilt image stabilization. It has digital stabilization, same as the C70, but it doesn't have the inbuilt image stabilization. So it's not I would say it's not as good of a camera compared to R5, because without the IS, when you come to lower light situation, you will just lose out a little bit on that. But in exchange for that, you get a very competent video camera, and digital IS actually works pretty well. So overall, the R5C, if you ask me, is a better hybrid camera than the R5 significantly, and it's actually a very good alternative cinema camera if you're looking at entry cinema range compared to the C70 itself. Now, if you ask me, at the price point, after you add everything together, is about 5.6K. The competitor to the R5C is actually the Z9, because this is the only guy that is promised to have 8K 60p built internally, that's internal RAW. The only thing is it doesn't have the professional audio interface, and it doesn't have ND filters. If you are a hybrid shooter, I would definitely recommend you R5C, because if you are willing to lose the IS, the inbuilt image stabilization for the body, willing to buy IS lens such as 2470, 1530, and put it on your R5C, I think the R5C is one of the best hybrid cameras, because it's literally a cinema camera. After you add in all the accessories, it's literally a cinema camera that does good photos, rather than a good photo camera that does a bit of video. And that's about it for today. I hope you enjoy this. And I'm just sharing my thoughts here. Of course, whatever I say is not the 100% truth because I do not have the camera on hand to try it out myself. But based on what I see in Gordon Liang's video, based on what I see in everybody else's videos out there, and what I read in the spec sheet, and how I understand the R5 cameras working and the cinema cameras working, I think the R5C is shaping up to be a very exciting camera. And if you ask me, because I'm not going to buy the R5C, I have to honestly say I'm not going to buy the R5C. The C70's firmware is more exciting to me because RAW in C70 with the DGO sensor is going to be sweet. And that's about it for today. I hope you enjoyed this and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.